Hi everyone, and welcome to the channel. And I'm really happy that you're here today to explore some potential red flags that may be present in your stage of recovery. My name is Lee, and I guide others to ensure their intentions within recovery from past lifestyles. And whether you're newest to your transition and looking to form good habits that will keep your goals in place, or any phase of this self-discovery process, it's always helpful for you and for all of us to check in with ourselves and gain some new approaches for our challenges, and even just to acknowledge what is working for us. And I just want to mention before we get going here that recovery and relapse within recovery does not strictly apply to substance. It can mean going back to other harming behaviors as well. And I'm sure that regardless of your circumstances, that you have fast forwarded the scene to what relapse looks like for you. And perhaps you already know firsthand. So it's very important to congratulate yourself for being here, because these are important dedications that you are continuing for yourself, and that we all are. So there are some common themes among the red flags that I'm going to be discussing, and you may recognize some of these, and some of these insights may surprise you. But regardless, I believe this episode will be good for you to explore your approach into these realizations of relapse prevention. So say hello and give a thumbs up if you're staying to tackle this topic. And let me know in the comments if relapse is something that often occupies your thoughts. I'm always interested in hearing what you have to share. And it's also good for us all to share. So let's get right into this by acknowledging that relapse is preventable. And yes, it is a good start. But how does that translate for you and your daily life? And here's the first step in your approach to gaining an insight on relapse being preventable. I know it's difficult, but forget about the circumstances of other people that have relapsed and the specific stories of their relapsing. So start to put your thoughts aside on that, because relapse prevention is about paying strong attention to yourself and your circumstances, because this is your story. And even though your own story changes daily when it comes to your own role within recovery, it is important to frame relapse prevention as your own unique approach. So always pay strict attention to yourself. And another tip in your approach to recovery is realizing that relapse is all about patterns. And this can be recent patterns or patterns from the past that haven't been addressed. And typically it can be a blend of any of these on a given moment. And these patterns and their existence in human behavior is certainly common, but how they unfold within you and how they are navigated by you are clearly unique to you. So let's reiterate. So far we have yourself, your recovery, your patterns in your way. And do bear in mind that it's likely in recovery that we can go a large amount of times without struggling while cruising through life, or we can be spinning circles around avoiding temptations and constantly taking steps to avoid that crutch of relief that we once turned to. And in both situations, there is a pattern at play, and that is getting too caught up in life. So we are either too busy spinning our thoughts and actions and trying to get away from our triggers and creating distractions, or on the other end of the spectrum, life is good and things are moving right along, and that's okay. So the pattern common to these two just mentioned is having lots of distractions. And there are things we miss when being distracted and not being mindful of our recovery. And there are specifically two things. One is we miss building a foundation to have in place when times get tough. And that could mean a single moment in our day of being caught off guard, or that could mean a buildup of stressors. And number two, we can miss the red flags that lead to relapse. And those red flags are the overlooked signs that could unfortunately lead us to saying things like, I was feeling generally uneasy, but I didn't know why or what. Or I was enjoying life and I just wanted to keep going. And we should enjoy. And we should feel uneasy as well. The key is paying attention to all of this and not just letting it happen. And once again, paying attention to yourself is key. And think strongly about this. This approach to your recovery, this is the most important relationship you have in recovery and in life, is with yourself. So to navigate our challenges, we must develop a connection with ourselves and take that time to stop and check in with ourselves. And it only takes a few minutes here and there to reflect on things that we feel would be helpful for us. And so with all of this framework in mind, I'm going to detail some specific red flags. And these telltale signs can occur at different intensities and frequencies, and once again, depending upon your specific situation. And some of these red flags will be obvious and others not so much. And they're in no particular order or relevance other than how they will surface on your radar. So the first red flag that I want to talk about is developing patterns of indecisiveness. And a good example of that is when we are trying to decide the best course of action, meanwhile getting so caught up in the details that we take no action. So be mindful of changing your mind often and not sticking to your guns. And yes, certainly weighing bigger decisions we have tends to take longer amounts of time and more consideration. However, often in terms of relapse buildup, it tends to be the smaller daily life and decisions that we need to be aware of. And a simple example of this is saying to ourselves, should I treat myself to a movie or should I do something more productive with my time? And going back and forward on these types of things, we need to be aware of these scenarios where we create rifts within ourselves. These little things, the second guessing and constantly changing our minds, can erode confidence. And we can lose trust in our ability to believe that we know what is best. And this can translate into some degree of mental burnout. Because when we are constantly thinking, but there's nothing to show for it, that's not good. And be aware, because feeling like we are getting nowhere can make us feel incompetent, which can potentially lead to throwing our arms up in the air and giving up. And needless to say, that isn't a good headspace within recovery. And another big one to watch for is fluctuations within your routines. So that's eating and sleeping and exercising and self-care and social time and work habits and personal interests. There's a broad spectrum of these shifts, and of course only you know your norms. But essentially these are inconsistencies in what were otherwise some routine patterns. And some examples of deviating from the typical norm can be sleeping too much or too little, or appetites fluctuating. Or are you neglecting things that you often enjoy doing? Or are you practicing your expressive gratitude on a daily basis? And if you meditate or journal or play music or listen to music, is that consistent? Now, you may not be doing any of these specific self-care activities. These are examples, and of course you have your own lifestyle, and we all have our own lifestyle. So once again, this is your recovery in your way. But if you notice your routine shifting, be aware and make it a point to hit a reset button. And yes, like many things here, it's always easier said than done. But do take the time to stop and tell yourself that you need to reset. And that intention at the very least will hopefully get into your headspace. The key is to find a way to consistently get back to your routines and practices that keep you grounded and aware. And it's very important to make efforts to get back to healthier routines, because those disruptions in sleep and nutrition and stress management and self-care, they can break down our constitution. and tired and hungry and angry, that's a window of opportunity for relapse. So please make your best efforts not to let the tired, hungry, angry compound day after day. So, speaking of effort, the next red flag requires very little effort to recognize. And the red flag is finding yourself wondering if you will be able to return to your old ways someday. So, for example, you could find yourself thinking, maybe I can call that person someday after some time has passed. Or maybe I can hit the casino next year. Or in my case, maybe I will be able to have a glass of wine with dinner some evening. These are harmful illusions of grandeur. And the pattern is our old friend, self-destruction, looking for a chance to swipe our progress slate clean. And be very careful. These fantasies tend to get creative when things are going great and life is cruising right along and you're doing okay. And please be careful of this slippery slope. Believing that you can dabble in those behaviors again in the future is a sure way to get you into those behaviors again in the future. So we need to forget about allowing those thoughts in any further than acknowledge the danger of them and showing them the door. And this is what makes this red flag the easiest of all to spot and approach. So treat it as the gift of the obvious. So when those thoughts kick in, handle them like the inaccurate, destructive clutter that they are, and by default of not wanting to relapse, banish those thoughts. And another red flag, which is the exact opposite of what we just detailed, is being convinced that you will never go back to the old ways again. So that is finding yourself saying, oh, that was the old me, or I'm not the same person. And there is a bit of a newsflash here. You are still you, only in different circumstances. And yes, you have transitioned away from those behaviors. And yes, you've made progress. And sometimes because of those better changes, we can tend to convince ourselves that we are a different person. But you are the same person. We are the same person that did the work to get us from those behaviors. And you are also the same person, and we are also the same person that became destructive and that lived a harming lifestyle. And I don't mean to make any of us feel bad. Yes, we were compromised mentally and emotionally to put ourselves through those events. But when you are convinced that that was the old you, that can translate into the new you not needing to do any work on yourself. And I want to share this with you. For years, I tried to quit my abusive drinking without changing anything other than the absence of consumption. And yes, I remained the same me, but I also remained the same me in the same patterns. So the new me could still go to an open bar event without having a backup plan. Or the new me could skip reaching out because I was fine yet again. And the new me would keep myself in the same stressful situations over and over again without a management plan. And there was no new me. And that was the same me, which was fine, but without a plan that didn't reach beyond the next moment. And that's not so fine. And this is the same you. And yes, in recovery, and yes, in better circumstances, and hopefully with a steady growing awareness of yourself and developing plans to be consistent with your plans to protect yourself. So it's important to embrace and accept and be good and to be honest to the same you. It's the approaches and the behaviors that change within us. So the same you with evolving approaches. And another warning sign is elevated generalized stress. And not the clear, stressful experiences where we know the particular source and circumstance. I'm referring to that creep-in kind of stress. So where we generally feel frustrated or annoyed or fed up in bouts or periods of boredom. It's the kind of generalized stress that makes the little things seem escalated. Like when you drop your toothbrush on the floor right after putting the toothpaste on it. Those types of things, if you know what I mean. Feeling provoked from the littlest of circumstances. So, being agitated in your thoughts, or having difficulty relaxing, or settling into a focus, this type of stress builds and builds, and it grows legs, and it can gain momentum. And this is the type of stress where you need to stop and take note. And this can definitely be a slippery slope to relapse if not addressed. The good thing is that it is easy to detect. It is very easy to tell when things throughout the day are driving us up the wall. And we need to be very careful and be aware of these patterns, because we tend to dismiss this because things are going well. And we don't have a particular explanation for feeling so tense. And it's quite normal to think, what difference does it make anyhow if these small things are getting on my nerves? We can blow it off as not being the end of the world and as being no big deal. But it can be a big deal. So these consistent tiny stressors get overlooked, and they build up over the days, and they get us angry, and we get tired of feeling agitated. And being fed up and tired of feeling a certain way is a potential breeding ground for relapse, because we don't want to feel that way anymore, and we know what to turn to alleviate those feelings. So be aware of allowing yourself to become increasingly agitated and fed up with the day-to-day. It can wear you down, and the next little thing could be a potential relapse. And when you are feeling irritable and lousy to be around, do not isolate, because that is another red flag. And yes, there is a pandemic, but don't cut yourself off from contact with others. Reach out, answer that phone, and get out and about, and be mindful of not staying too much in your head. And make yourself available to talk, and send good morning memes to ensure a response from others, and force contact if you know that you are deliberately ignoring others that have your best interest at heart. And don't avoid people reaching out to you, because shunning from others can not only become a bad habit, it can develop into a coping mechanism. And when we have cut off contact from day to day, we begin to erode that precious dynamic of being accountable for our actions. And the consequence can be relapse. And you need to be aware, and we all need to be aware, of becoming inclined to spending more and more time with just us, and you with just your thoughts and words. Which is good when used in moderation to develop a connection with ourselves, but typically not good as a general approach to the day. So stay in contact with others that you trust. And another thing to be aware of is loss of good judgment. And this can be one of those red flags that is hard to pinpoint until the ultimate poor judgment takes place. And examples are exposing yourself to triggering situations when you know it may put you in danger, or taking on too much when you know you're doing just fine as you are, or absorbing yourself in people's dramas or problems that you have no place to be in. Another subtle form of poor decision making is setting unrealistic goals for yourself, which can lead to disappointment. And typically bad decisions are signs that we are not paying attention to our needs, and we become careless with our guidelines that we have put in place. And our self-care can slip, and we're not taking time to explore the connection with ourselves. And all of this is once again our old destructive pattern looking to erase the wonderful progress that we've made. So check in. And this is a good time to remind yourself that your patterns, your recovery, and your way. And another warning sign that can soon follow from loss of good judgment is loss of options. And this is where it becomes very evident of how ignoring one red flag can easily escalate and unfold into another very critical situation. When we are faced with limiting consequences of not initially thinking things through and not paying attention to ourselves within our surroundings, we can, by simple default, limit our options. And these narrowed options for ourselves is very stressful. And there's a strong potential of feeling backed in a corner. And this is very challenging for our principles and our boundaries and certainly our anxiety levels. Not to mention, there is a strong likelihood of feeling the shame and the guilt of ignoring our best interest. And this is not a good place to be in. And this can be a perfect storm for relapse. So poor decisions, low options, forced decisions, it's a vicious cycle. And I would be curious to know if hearing this makes you feel uneasy. And mention it in the comments if it does, because it certainly makes me feel uneasy. And it's a reminder of the past and how quickly and badly that things can unfold. So please be aware when you're getting careless in your choices, particularly in your recovery. When we become depleted of options and feel hopelessness creeping in, it doesn't take long for that pendulum to swing back to reverting to old coping mechanisms of dealing with pain. And be very, very careful, please, of these slippery slopes. And another red flag, just as too much of bad things are no good, too much of the good things can be no good as well. And let me explain, because this is not an attempt to steal the sunshine or rain on your parade. Typically, when things are going well and we get into a cruise mode and we assume that nothing needs to be on our radar, kind of situations like that. So you might feel like you've got the hang of this recovery and that you've got this transition covered and that you're on top of the world. And yes, you should be for your efforts and changes. But being too relaxed and too happy-go-lucky takes us back to letting the guard down. So enjoy your progress and yourself and your plans and your life that you have transitioned into. But always remember to never say never. We never know what can happen when we're cruising through the good times and not prepared or fortified for the curveballs. Overconfidence is a red flag. So be honest to yourself. Enjoy the progress you've made, but admit right alongside that recognition that vulnerabilities exist among your courage. But simply know, to have more of those great feelings, you must be aware and continue to build the connection with yourself. And it was a continuing care counselor that spotted my overconfidence. And she said, well, 100 people, including yourself, will believe that you're not going to relapse. And she asked me a very simple yet important question. Are you perfect? And well, enough said. So thinking you got recovery aced is believing that you're perfect. And there's no possibility of a mistake. So that's a great default question for many things in life. And it's a great check-in. Am I perfect? So keep learning, keep connecting, keep enjoying your progress and the benefits of it, but keep protecting it. So there's a lot of quick and important information here. And just as important to realize these signs is to develop your approaches to these red flags. So for guidance on how to apply this awareness to the circumstances within your life, make sure to get my Red Flags in Recovery workbook, and I have the link below. I created this companion to this episode to facilitate your understanding of these patterns and help you develop some plans to put into place. The link is below, so be sure to pair this episode with the workbook in your journey to ensure your recovery. And go to my website, recoverywithlee.com, to further explore your discovery and learn more about my story and how I can further guide you with more resources to navigate recovery. And you can see me in Instagram with reminders and motivations, and also the Facebook group, Recovery with Lee. So subscribe to get notified, and please share with others that may benefit in learning more about staying on track with recovery. And remind yourself, my recovery, my patterns, my way. Be aware and be good to yourself, and we'll see you in the next episode.